So in this next section, we're going to learn how to use more CSS. So the CSS does the formatting, and the CSS that we're going to learn, you can see it outlined right here. So we're going to learn how to use border, which is a CSS property to put a border around things. And then we're going to learn one of my favorite things, one of my favorite CSS properties, and that's border radius. And border radius allows us to start making things that were squares and rounding their corners so that we can make them circles. And once we've learned border radius, we'll learn the properties padding and margin. So that's going to allow us to take content and put a little space between it and other content. And then that leads us to the box model. So the box model is one of the most fundamental things that you have to learn and know about websites. So everything on a web page is a box. It's all a box. It's all square. And you take those boxes and you basically stack them on top of each other like Tetris. And that's how you build web pages. You have different boxes made with different tags, and you just stack those on top of each other. So we're going to learn all about the box model. And we're going to learn about something called box sizing border box. So box sizing is another CSS property. And box sizing is really helpful because as you change certain properties about the different, CSS, as you change certain CSS properties, so as you change like the border or the padding on a certain element, you don't want that to throw off the alignment, the layout of other elements. So box sizing border box helps us with that. And you're going to see how it works and what it does. I'm going to show you all that. Really important. And then we're going to have a little bit of a review of all this. So I'll review everything we've learned so far. And then I'll give you some challenges. And you'll be able to do those challenges and get that hands-on practice so that you really reinforce everything you're learning. And then I'll give you the solutions to the challenges so you could see how I solved the challenges. I know when I was learning coding stuff, it was always really helpful for me to see how does somebody else code, to watch that live coding. So that's where you'll be able to see me doing that, solving all those challenges. All right, so that's what we have in this section. I'm looking forward to it, and I just want to take one moment to give you an even higher level overview because I think it's really important when you're on a journey like this to step back and take a look at the entire forest. Because a lot of times we're down in the details and we're just looking at a few trees. Let's get that high level overview where we're seeing the big picture and we're seeing the whole forest, so to speak. Kind of a crazy analogy. But look at how far we've come, right? We've done the getting started and you've learned all about developer tools and how you get in there and what they do and the HTTP status codes and how you change websites by right-clicking them and choosing inspect, and that takes you into Chrome's developer tools. And you learn about the dinosaur game, and you learn about coding boot camps and what a great career opportunity those can present if you want to go down this path even further, how you could land a $100,000 a year job. We've learned about the history of the internet and the World Wide Web, and that there's a difference between the internet and the World Wide Web, a distinction that most people don't make. So we've learned all that. We learned a little bit about BitTorrent and the dark web and how the web works and web documentation and where we go for web documentation. It's always MDN, Mozilla Developer Network is the best source. You got an introduction to HTML where we built our first web page. You were introduced to Emmet and you saw those first tags, the document type declaration up at the top. And then we had the HTML opening and closing tags, right? So you've learned this vocabulary, opening and closing tags. You've learned the difference between tags and elements. Right, so we have the HTML opening and closing tag, then the head opening and closing tag, and the body opening and closing tag, and then the title inside the head, and the meta charset UTF-8. Wow, you've learned so much. So we had the introduction to HTML, and then we did an introduction to CSS, and we talked about rule sets and how the separation of concerns. So HTML is for your structure, right? CSS is for your formatting. JavaScript is for your functionality. And so we have that separation of concerns. And then to do the formatting, we use CSS. And CSS, to use it, we write rule sets. And a rule set has a selector or selectors. We could have multiple selectors in one rule set. And then a declaration block, which is between the curly braces. And then the declaration block has declarations. And then say it with me. What's each declaration made up of? Say it with me. It's made up of a property and a value, right? We have those CSS properties. So that's what each declaration is made up of. So you've learned that. We've learned how to link CSS to HTML, that you could do it with an external style sheet. You could do it up in the head, right? Internal styles, or you could do it right in line, which is not recommended. You've learned the recommended way, which is the external style sheet. You've learned how to configure your environment in the different IDEs which are out there, and even what IDEs mean. Holy cow, you've come so far. You've learned why I choose WebStorm, and if you're not going to choose WebStorm, Atom.io, why that would be like the next best choice, but don't use Sublime and absolutely don't use Dreamweaver. You've also become skilled with GitHub. So you learned what GitHub is and why version control software is important, the history of GitHub and the history of Git and Linus Torvald and Linux. I mean, we've learned a ton of material. You're getting a super solid, strong foundation. And I just want to commend you for that. And as an instructor, 20 years teaching college and university level, I've always found that it helps so many students just to stop and get this high-level overview and to also have a moment of appreciation where we just appreciate ourselves, right? Appreciate yourself for how much you've done already, because this is a big body of knowledge. It takes time to master it. It's like any craft. You're a craftsperson. You're learning a craft. It takes time, and drop by drop, that bucket's going to get filled, right? But if you're learning the guitar, if you're learning woodworking, anything that you learn that's a craft, which what isn't, it takes time. It just takes time. And so this high-level overview and a moment of appreciation, I just wanted to pass that on to you because you are doing awesome and you're learning some great stuff. So we got all that GitHub stuff, command line interface, right? Terminal, getting that all set up, Unix commands, we have all that going. And then we did in the last section, the HTML Essentials, where we learned the paragraph tag element, the heading element, the unordered list, the ordered list, the link element, the image element, the anchor element, the paragraph element. And then we also learned the difference between absolute and relative URLs. Ask any web developer working today, and there's going to be a big percentage of them that get confused about absolute and relative URLs because for whatever reason, that's a huge hole in the curriculum, it seems. And there's a lot of people who don't understand that and who are actually building websites, but they just never got that. We've learned comments, how to do comments in HTML and CSS, file naming conventions, folder naming conventions. So there's so much that you've learned already, and I'm excited to share more material with you. This is a great field of study. It's totally fun. You're going to be able to create and build websites, create and build when you're done with this course. Pretty soon we'll be building great stuff. We're getting there. And for me, that's one of the greatest pleasures in the world. I think it's God's work to create something, right? God was an artist. He created, if you believe in God or Allah or Buddha or whoever you believe in, but like how amazing to create something. So we get to do this God's work, creating stuff, and that's coming. So we're getting there. And this next section, we are going to learn CSS Essentials and some of the things you absolutely need to know about building web pages and how they relate to CSS.